Hi, everyone, and let me extend my welcome to you today to our third in a series of webinars this fall. And it's my pleasure to introduce our other moderator for today, Dr. Jenny O'Rourke. Jenny is an assistant professor at Loyola University of Chicago. She previously was the director of simulation at the University of Chicago, Illinois, where she implemented simulation into the undergraduate and graduate curriculum, where she also trained over 40 faculty at at UC, Illinois. She's a member of the NLN 2016 Sim Leader Program and received her CHSE certification in 2016. She serves as a member of the NOMF Simulation Task Force as a consultant for the NLN, and she has numerous publications and presentations in the area of simulation. So Jenny is going to say hello and introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Marianne. So I just wanted to introduce this series that we've had. This is the fourth in a series of 4 webinars that we've been hosting, that NLN's been hosting since August. And the overarching topic is taking aim, really looking at good practice in nursing education. So the first webinar, and these are available for free on the NLN website. The first was a panel talking about best practice in higher education. The second one in September was focused on best practice in cognitive teaching. The second one was psychomotor. That was in October. And then this is the wrap-up session, and we're focusing today on affective learning. So I am really pleased to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Anka Roberto. She is a colleague and a dear friend of mine. She's a psychiatric nurse practitioner, mental health nurse practitioner, and assistant professor at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She is trained as an eye movement desensitization and processing nurse practitioner. She works with young children and families who've been traumatized. Her area of scholarship is focused on the impact of psycho-spiritual and holistic approaches on resilience and post-traumatic growth in children and families. She's a natural leader and has completed several leadership fellowships, including with the NLN and ANASCL. She leads a work group with the National Telehealth Task Force, which is aimed at delivering a telehealth toolkit. She's an active member in the local mental health community in Wilmington. She's authored book chapters, publications on trauma and resilience, simulation pedagogy, and is highly skilled as a community engaged leader. So please welcome Dr. Anka Roberto.
Thank you so much, Dr. O'Rourke, for that wonderful introduction. I am so excited to be sharing what we need to know about affective domain as we're teaching our students in the online environment, particularly. So I'm speaking from the viewpoint of a trained psychiatric nurse practitioner and a pediatric nurse for many years prior to my time as an NP. So really it's so natural for me to talk to you guys about what the affective domain is and how essential it is in learning as we're educating our future nurses. So before I start, I would love to get to know who is here today. So I am going to share with you, if you go to menti.com, or you could take a picture of this QR code. And if you go to menti.com, you can put in this number, the 4746728. And I'm going to switch my screen really quick so that I can launch the poll, just to let us know who you are, where you are. Do you all see my screen? Oh, yay. Okay, we've got Chicago, California, Mass, Idaho. Beauteous. Lots of people all over the place. It's so wonderful. Scottsdale, Arizona. Yes, I went there last year for the ANACSL conference. Massachusetts, yay, Texas. Wonderful. So people from all over, DC, one of my favorite areas to visit. I'm formerly from New York, so I miss the big city. Wonderful. Thank you so much, you guys, for sharing who you are and where you're from. Okay, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint now. And the next question you should see, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you one more question as well to get to know who you are. So now we know where you are. So let's talk a little bit about who you are. So, what is your professional role and title? And it should prompt you to go to the next thing. There we go. Nursing faculty, instructor, professor. Okay, great, great, great. Wonderful. We've got some deans. We have an FMP, coordinators. So exciting. All different levels of professor, program head. Great. So we've got some admins. Oh, we have an NCLEX instructor, operating room charge. Great. So this just helps me know who my audience is. I see simulation coordinator, skills lab. Great. Wonderful. Staff development. Great. So what I'm going to be sharing with you actually helps every human being. So this will be really great to continue to learn together. So as we learn a little bit about affective development, I really wanted to take the opportunity to share a video that really speaks to what I'm going to be covering today and allows me to allows you to feel what you need to feel as you move forward. Yeah, so I know, Mike, I got goosebumps when I watched that. So I really want to hear from you guys. So what did you notice as the nurses were treating their patients in this video? And if you can go back to that Menti slide, if you can go ahead and share. Thank you. Selflessness, life-changing, compassionate, love, compassion, inspiration, caring, bravery, touch, diversity, innovation, proud. Yeah, me too. Empathy, courage, physical closeness, eye contact, autonomous, life-changing, smart thinking. Wonderful. Thank you for that, you guys. So this is what you all came up with. You weren't seeing my screen before. These are all the words that people shared. So this is just something that really is something that I'll be talking about today. All these things are the things that I'm hopeful that we can learn today to be able to continue to build for our students. So as I touch upon the affective domain, it really is important to understand what it is, what it feels like, kind of the definitions of the affective domain, and how we can move forward as we're really trying to make an impact with the students that we're teaching and the staff that we're training on our units. It really speaks to the heart of nursing and the art of nursing. And I'm so glad you guys got the psychomotor and the cognitive domain complete, because without the affective domain, those two are actually not possible. So I'm going to speak from a trauma lens, because that's my area of specialty. And if you can all see my hands, right? So when we think about our prefrontal cortex, which is our cognitive brain, it's the front of it's the front of my hand here, this is my brain, right? And when we're talking about the affective domain, I'm talking about my thumb that's kind of in the inner corner or inner cortex of the brain, which is pretty much our limbic system, or our amygdala lives there. And that's where our emotions usually come from and our feelings, right? That's where a lot of our fight or flight or freeze response comes from. So when the brain actually gets activated and our fight or flight or freeze response is activating, what happens is our amygdala is triggered and our brain kind of goes offline, right? So I see this in a lot of kids that I treat. I see it in a lot of the students that I'm actually teaching as well. I'm sure you do too. So when our students are not okay, when there's a lot going on, particularly during these COVID times, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed, they're really feeling the impact of the environment around them. A lot of them that usually do well in school, you usually do well on exams or on or writing. A lot of times we're having a difficult time getting things across to them because what's happening is their amygdala is responding, their emotional brain's responding and reacting, and their cognitive brain is offline, you guys. So there's actually neuronal networks that are starting to kind of disconnect, right? They're not making that beautiful synapse together. So just know that that is something that we really need to pay attention to as we're teaching, especially during this era. So this is really very, very, very important as we're moving forward, as we're educating our students during these pandemic times and outside of those times, right? So the prevalence of school shootings and all those kind of things really are impacting the post 9/11 era, really are impacting the way that our students are learning. So if we're not helping to build and heal the affective brain, right? That emotional brain, a lot of our cognitive and psychomotor responses literally will either fight, freeze, or flee. Okay, so we can't do one with the other. Okay. And I'm sure many of you have heard this quote, right? I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So the emotion of nursing is truly that art of nursing, right? And really, what we're trying to um, show is that, and what is evident from those who do teach from the affective domain, is that we're influencing values, beliefs, and attitudes, right? Um, this Although the cognitive and the affective domains interact with each other in learning, any behavior that has an emotional component lies within that affective domain. So that's a lot of times we remember things that we have felt, right? So as you're watching that video, you're seeing these moments, and our hippocampus actually stores the memory, and our hippocampus lives right next to our amygdala, our limbic system, and the messages get sent to the amygdala of, oh, that made me feel good, or oh, that made me feel really bad. So we can either have a traumatic response or we can have a feel good response, right? And those are the things that students end up retaining, or the people you're educating end up retaining, as we're kind of thinking about the affective domain. So my question to you all is, why is this overlooked? Why are we not, what are we missing, right? Why are some educators, why is it so difficult for some to teach into the affective domain, or really build the affective domain for the folks that we're educating? Sometimes it's difficult to measure, right? And that's, the literature has really showed that. Um, Sometimes it may just feel uncomfortable for some. So, and it all depends on how we were raised, right? So, we all were children at one time in our lives, and we all were born into different homes and different family structures. And we have to remember what we were taught, right? Were we taught to express ourselves? Were we taught to allow to have emotion? Were we taught to talk about how we're feeling? Right. So when you think about, how we educate people, particularly in like simulation pedagogy, right? You think about, you usually ask about what you think about it? And then I usually always ask, well, how did that make you feel? How did the exchange make you feel? And that's the affective domain that I'm tapping into there. Okay. I've actually heard nurse faculty say it's not our job to kind of massage the emotional part of a response or a reaction with a patient that a student has. The biggest learning can happen when you ask those kind of questions during pre-brief and debrief and any other interactions, and we'll talk more about that. And some just don't know how to model this. And I give you an example of what I started my nursing career as an LPN, and I had we used to call her the drill instructor. I had a retired Army nurse as my instructor, and we were scared of her. I mean, really, really scared of her. And there was no room for emotion in her interaction. She just wanted us to learn the skill, wanted us to know the content, and didn't leave any room for exploration of where like clinical reasoning and critical thinking skills come from. She just wanted us to get it right, right? So that really was difficult as we were getting trained, and it was super hard to kind of embrace. And I still remember her very vividly because that's my traumatic brain. So there are several potential causes that exist for this collective fear of the affective domain, right? It's tempting to blame all the different like Western thoughts between the body and the emotions that are considered that stem from the heart and mind. We really need to emphasize this feeling, tone, and emotion, or that degree of acceptance or rejection that may be difficult to teach or measure, right? And that's where I'm going to talk to you about the different levels of the affective domain, but really allowing us to recognize that as we're educating our students and our staff. It varies, the affective outcomes, they vary from simple attention to selected phenomenon to complex but internally consistent qualities of character and conscience, right? Um, these emotions are messy and they're unpredictable, and sometimes that's the hard part for lots of folks, right? An example of that is like, as we listen to music, it can energize some people, but it can irritate others. So everybody responds differently, right? We really need to focus on connecting students with their emotions so that they're allowed to release these feelings and these memories from non-school life circumstances that educators are uncomfortable dealing with, right? Very few teachers have that time or the inclination to venture there. A lot of times we're just so busy, right? And it's particularly this semester, I have found it difficult with students because they really are having a hard time this semester. So I've thrown in into my 2 touch points on my online learning. Friday is my self-care announcement. So I do a Friday tip. So I'll be posting that this afternoon for my students to really tap into how do they regulate themselves for the semester. So I'm kind of dubbing as their self-care counselor and educator, which I'm sure many of us are doing this semester. So what is the affective domain and what is it not, right? So this is like a good visual for you guys. You already reviewed the cognitive. Those are all the thoughts, right? Psychomotor are the skills. But the affective, they deal with the feelings, emotions, and the attitudes and things like that, right? But we also, as we're doing psychomotor skills, we have an opinion about that, right? So the affective domain is actually within the psychomotor skill and within the cognitive um, part too. It's one influences the other and vice versa. So just recognize that as you're kind of thinking about this. So evidence does show that outcomes are lacking, but they're required in education. And these soft skills, which we talk about, is kind of the affective domain skills, right? They're important for lots of things as we're developing leaders in healthcare. They're important for productivity, employee satisfaction, a healthy workplace, and ultimately success for like the world we live in, right? Um, Concepts from the affective domain include self awareness, analytical thinking, leadership skills, team building skills, flexibility, acceptance of diversity, the ability to communicate effectively, creativity, problem solving skills, listening, diplomacy, and change readiness. And you know what our nation looks like today. So you know that it's so important to have all these factors. And sometimes that those folks who are lacking in the affective domain have really a difficult time leading, right? And I'm seeing this on different levels in different areas of my career right now. Those leaders who are really doing a great job fiscally or economically for our, whatever structure, agency or university or whatever, and lack that this affective domain really does get in the way of what that may look like and what that could look like for success as we're trying to pull people together. Because at the end of the day, we're relational beings, right? So we can't exist in this world by ourselves. If we can't develop the affective domain efficiently enough for their students, we really are doing a disservice to them. So values and beliefs and what that means for us, right? So attitudes, beliefs, and values that are expressed in opinions or judgments of worth, they transcend to all aspects of nursing. That's true holistic nursing. We need to help them build awareness of these attitude, beliefs, and values that really help guide clinical reasoning and clinical decision making, right? And that critical thinking. We're always looking to grow for our students. And I see it a lot when I teach in simulation. So a lot of times when I'm debriefing the students, I'll kind of bring them back to that point in time as I'm looking at their debriefing video with them. And I'll ask them, what were you thinking at that point? And then more importantly, what were you feeling at that point? And the feeling usually is, I didn't feel smart enough. I didn't think I was making the right decision. And maybe that comes from like an old faculty person or whoever in their life negatively spoke down to them. So that comes from the value and belief system about oneself that they've gathered from other people. And that's super important, right? So that we really need to help them form new attitudes and belief systems. A lot of times we're doing a lot of repairing with our students. Um, and it really does get in the way whether or not students choose to engage or not with a client, right? We think about the student who's working with a patient who's got who's in a palliative care approach, right? That if that student is afraid or there's some fear factor there, or perhaps there's a previous life experience, like if they had a sibling or a mother who just passed away, that's going to become a blocking agent for that student to be able to engage in a therapeutic communication and conversation with those clients, with the client and their family. So it's super important that we're emphasizing on this, right? And that we're doing this work together as we're moving forward, particularly during this very stressful time related to the pandemic. And again, I said this earlier, but this is the values and beliefs is really where critical thinking and clinical reasoning starts, right? It's kind of like we're forming and we're allowing we're forming the thoughts and the belief patterns for our students because they come from a home they were raised in and they come as freshmen in college or wherever you're meeting them with values and beliefs, right? So it's our opportunity to understand what their values and beliefs are, lean into that with them, and then maybe teach them worldly views, right? Because a lot of us students are not coming from this kind of worldly view. I myself was raised by immigrants. My parents migrated here from Croatia, and I had this like little bubble of a world that I lived in. And it wasn't until I went to college that it was like very eye-opening for me to see the world outside of my little space, right? So it's just an opportunity to tap into that with your students. Many theorists, right? Many philosophers and psychotherapists really do have this belief that using the therapeutic relationship is so important, right? And the nurse can learn to recognize the needs of others through this, like Paplau, Orlando, Leininger, Brammer, Hoffling, and then Piaget states this, right? At no level, at no state, even in the adult, can we find a behavior or a state which is purely cognitive without affect, nor a purely affective state without a cognitive element involved. So we can't have one without the other. Our brains are just that's how they're made, right? We're made with an emotional brain and we have to allow for that emotional brain to fire on all cylinders. Okay? So just recognize that. So I love saying this out loud all the time, right? Nursing is both an art and a science. And the art piece is that affective domain, and the science piece typically is that psychomotor and cognitive pieces to really help to bridge the two with kind of evidence-based practice in the middle and compassion infused in there. So I really like to emphasize that. So this is a nice diagram that I found that I think would be helpful for you guys to really see the left side. We've got affective, the art of nursing. I was like, yay, found it. And then the cognitive and psychomotor domains are really the science of nursing, like coordinating things. And those are kind of like the higher levels that I'll talk about in regards to what that looks like. So here the student is recognizing the need of others in that affective domain. They're responding, and we'll talk more about that. And then they're providing care, emotional support. And those are the things that we saw in the video that I showed earlier. Okay. So professional nursing requires that we have sufficient understanding and awareness of our own personality and its effect on others, right? Because that's that interpersonal relationship. And the nurse must also study that behavior. So it really allows for us to teach them, notice what's going on with you. I say this to my students a lot. Okay, tap into what's happening with you first before you engage in a therapeutic conversation. So as I train my Psych NP students, it's, really recognize what's happening here before you walk into a space with a client, because that countertransference and transference is very, very typical as we engage with our clients back and forth, and nurses with their patients. Okay. So there are 5 different levels of the affective domain. And level 1 is kind of like the base. This is the first level, right? It's kind of like a tiered approach, is to receive, right? The students receives information, right, from the person they're taking care of. And in the affective domain, we want to recognize that they're being sensitive to something that exists and progress awareness towards that, right? So that's the first step. They have to receive. And some of the verbs in the affective domain, and I'll share those with you in the next couple slides. The verb I've highlighted here is asks. So the student asks the right question. So when you're thinking about how do you develop these learning objectives within simulation scenarios, or in your course, or in your clinical courses, or in an assignment, right? Or in a module, these are the verbs that you want to use as you're working towards developing the affective domain. Level 2 is responding, right? And this is concerned with the active response by the learner. So how are they responding? What are they doing? What are you seeing as the educator? What are you seeing? So you're seeing that the nurse assists the patient in carrying out activities of daily living. Okay, so that's how you would kind of be able to evaluate whether or not you see that. And then valuing. So valuing, the student then indicates acceptance and internalization of that value or attitude, and it almost like makes it their own. So they take that other person's values and beliefs and then has some empathy towards it, or compassion. So those words may be shared in that space as well. And then the verb here is initiates. They initiate the building of interpersonal relationships with their patient. And then level 4 is organization. So the learner is encountering situations in which more than one value is relevant. So it's kind of like they're they're starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And do you see how this is developing that critical thinking and clinical reasoning for the student? Is they are now negotiating, prioritizing, figuring out what to do next, clinical decision making. So then they make a choice, right? So that's the verb. They're making a choice to do certain things, right, with their patient, because they're in their brain, they're prioritizing what's next, because they're valuing, right, this earlier one, they're valuing what needs to happen first or next or whenever, and then they're organizing it in their affective brain, in their affective domain, and then they're deciding to characterize it. This is the highest level, where the student internalizes that value system and then kind of applies it to what they're sharing, what they're teaching, what they're doing with that client. And an example of that is they're displaying empathy while utilizing motivational interviewing skills with patients, right? So they're kind of bringing it home. They're bringing all of the other levels together, and they're characterizing it for themselves and for the people they're caring for. So I thought this would be helpful for you guys, and you guys should have this in your PDF handouts of all the different domains, right? The receiving, responding, valuing, organizing, and characterizing, and kind of what some of the terms are. And I've given you 2 slide decks that have 2 slides that have these different terms, so you can use them as you're building your course or modular objectives. And just notice that usually when we're evaluating this for students, we're looking at the behaviors, right? What we see here and perhaps what we respond to. And then it really is responsible for personality development and how that person exchanges or interacts with the other person. And I talked about this earlier, how important it is in leadership and teamwork, because we don't live in a bubble by ourselves. These are some other verbs that you can use. So these are just kind of things, that you can plug and play into your objectives as you're trying to develop objectives for the affective domain. And again, here's just a nice visual of the tiered approach. So you're receiving first and then all the way up to characterization, right? So here they have to be willing to pay attention. The second one, they have to react or comply, sorry. They have to accept, right? And then they rearrange value systems, and then they incorporate values into life or into actions with their clients, or patients, I should say. So how do we do this in the online environment? So I do this in many ways. I do it really well face to face because I'm trained as a mental health practitioner. I just think so many of us do it so naturally because we're compassionate nurses. So a lot of us are probably already doing this work. We're doing it by role modeling what it looks like to be empathetic and compassionate towards the folks that we're working with and towards our own students. You know, for me, I have a lot of reflective assignments that I allow for my students to reflect back in the online environment. So a lot of my modular objectives look like this, right? So utilizing or implementing or asking particular questions during the reflection process. I have discussion boards that I have built in so that the students can have dialogue. And I ask a lot of thinking, feeling questions in there to build that affective development piece. And journaling, because that self-reflection is so important to build insight. Because if we're not reflecting, we're not building insight, right? Because how do you know if you're not asking yourself? And then the written or verbal articulation. So, as we're talking to our students, as we're, having Zoom calls with them, as we're interacting with them, that back and forth, building that emotional brain of theirs, right? And particularly during this time and during this tech era, and many of us have said this out loud, it's hard sometimes because these students, they don't know how to have conversations, right? Because all their conversations are happening with their thumbs or a quick little Snapchat, and they're not getting the feedback. They're just getting pinged. So it's really important to teach them emotional intelligence, right? And teaching them what it looks like to be happy or facially, right? And exchanged with them what that feels and looks like. Clinical vignettes, I do a lot of empathy building in my courses. No matter the topic, I'm teaching research, you guys. So even in my research courses, I'm doing this. So I'm trying to pick articles that have some of these kind of emotional brain in there, right? So a lot of like psychological or psych mental health nursing research studies and things like that. I do a lot of work around trauma. So I share a lot of the EMDR work that I've done. And a lot of times I'll share some of those papers with them. So just know there's an opportunity to absolutely share these with them via clinical vignettes or watching live or tape demonstration with pre-brief and debrief, right? Want to make sure that we're spending time in pre-brief and debrief with them. If it's not live, it can be asynchronous, and we can actually use some technology to be able to do that pre and post via discussion board or like video clips on Canvas or Blackboard or whatever you use for your courses. Role-playing exercises, and I'm going to actually show that to you in a little bit. And I just found this wonderful article on this 360 view. It's this augmented reality where some researchers and faculty have found it helpful to immerse their student attached to a person in the OR or attached to a person in a clinical space so that they can acclimate themselves emotionally to the environment. So a lot of emotional intelligence work has been done, EI work has been done in the OR because all you see are eyeballs. And now we're doing that real life, right? Our masks are taking up our entire face. So all we're seeing are our brows and eyes. And you can tell a lot by the movement of the eyebrow and where people are and the look of their eyes. So this article really speaks to that, and it's in my references. So I would encourage you guys to read it. It's really amazing. So how we did this this last semester in the spring, we usually do a an end of semester simulation for our students. They come to campus and they do some face-to-face simulations, kind of like an OSCE sort of. And this was for undergraduate students at the time. Well, we couldn't come on campus, so we had to flip it all telehealth. So what we did was we developed a very basic telehealth simulation where I was the faculty slash standardized patient, and my student was the triage nurse. So the role of the triage nurse was at a local mental health clinic, and they were to gather information, right? So receiving, and then they were supposed to organize that and then characterize it and then come up with some like follow-up treatment triage plan for them. Using medical decision making. So we used some affect stuff and some cognitive stuff, and we did some psychomotor because they had to navigate telehealth, right? and what that looked like. So some of the learning outcomes for that simulation was to assess the acuity, and then safely triage the patient using clinical reasoning skills, right? So that really tells me that they're working on their affect there. They then had to create a nursing care plan, and then we were looking for them to display empathy and compassion, really, while they were engaging in the therapeutic conversation. So myself and my colleague Jenny are going to do some role playing. So it's going to take us a couple of minutes, and I want you guys to think about these domains here. And as you're watching us, this is going to be your like sort of cheat sheet. So if you can, just jot down what you're noticing in all of the domains as we're having this exchange with one another. Okay. And in the slide deck, this is the scenario progression outline. Feel free to take a peek at those if you have them handy for yourself. So I am going to move Jenny over to my shared screen. Okay. So Jenny's going to play the patient, and I'm going to be the nurse that is welcoming her to the call. So she's physically calling me, and Jenny will spend. I'll tell you when we'll stop. Okay. Okay. So ring, ring, ring. Hi, this is the Wilmington Mental Health Center. Anka speaking. How may I help you?
Oh my God, I think I'm having a heart attack.
Okay. Can you tell me your name?
Jenny,
And your date of birth, please?
March 23rd, 1973.
Okay. And tell me your phone number just in case we get disconnected.
708-213-5555.
Okay. And tell me more about how you're feeling.
Oh my God, it's like I'm being stabbed in my chest. It hurts so bad.
Oh, I'm so sorry you're feeling this. Can you tell me when this started, when the pain began?
Just like 30 minutes ago. It's horrible.
Okay. On a scale of 0 to 10, how bad is the
Oh,
pain?
it's like a 10. It's horrible.
Okay. Can you describe the pain to me?
It's just like stabbing right here in my heart.
Okay. Is it radiating out to your arms or up your jaw?
No, it's
Okay.
right here.
Any dizziness?
No, just pain,
Okay. And tell me how old you are, Jenny?
I'm 47.
Okay. Any history of like cardiac stuff or high blood pressure,
No,
high
I'm totally
cholesterol?
healthy. Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever felt this before?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think it's
Okay.
not this like this. No,
Okay. And when did this start?
just like 30 minutes ago. It just came on suddenly, I'm
Okay.
like here in my house dealing with 3 teenagers who are trying to homeschool. Oh my God.
Yeah. Do you know what triggered it? Did something happen or?
I mean, I don't know. I just like, so stressed running around taking care of everything. And I don't know. All of a sudden I just like, just the pain.
Okay. Are you feeling it's getting a little bit less as you're talking about it?
Oh, maybe a little bit, but it's pretty bad.
Okay. Okay. Any history of anxiety or depression in your family or for yourself?
Not for me. I mean, maybe, my mom, she has a little bit of anxiety, but that's it.
Okay. Okay. You've never been treated for anxiety or anything like
No,
that?
no, no, no.
Okay. Have you ever had this before?
I mean, I have a lot of stress, but not like this horrible pain. No.
Okay. Okay. So this could be a couple of things, but just to make sure that it's not cardiac related, I am gonna, maybe you could call, or you can go to the local ER, or I can call, we can get you transported over there. So if you
Okay.
stay on the line with me, I can make some calls and just don't go anywhere, and I can arrange transportation. If it is cardiac related, they'll do an EKG and all that kind of stuff, but it also can be just stress levels and anxiety as well. So I will make that call first. I will come back and we'll do some more screening together. Okay, for that second
Okay.
piece. Is that okay with
Okay.
you?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jenny, I will be right back. So don't hang up. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you, Jenny. There's some questions I would love to ask you guys. as we move forward. So if you can go back to the Menti, that would be wonderful. And what did you notice as you watched this interaction? Oh. Okay. Does everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, thank you. So empathy, sensitivity. I was very calm. I was very empathetic. Sincerity, my calming voice. Yeah, thank you. And you noticed her level went down, right? If I asked her probably in 5 more minutes. And typically that exchange goes on for like 10 minutes. It's just for the sake of time. So this is the actual exercise we did with the students. Questioning in a calm manner. Yep. She got more calm as you spoke to her. Yes, holistic, reassuring. I was getting information while I was trying to keep her calm. I wasn't explaining. I didn't minimize. Good. Yeah. So this is the exact scenario that we did with our students. And they learned so much from it as we debriefed together, and allowing for them to understand what it could feel like and what it could look like as they were actually interacting with a patient. So a lot happened in the debriefing process. So if Jenny was to debrief with me, right, if she was my faculty person, she probably, and this is usually typically what I ask in the debriefing, what, you know, how are you feeling? What are your thoughts, right? How did you think it went? If it's in a group, how are the rest of you feeling? What are the rest of you thinking? These are just kind of some debriefing tips that we use. So I always talk about that first because a lot of times once that's out, they then can start thinking about what was going on. Because again, back to that emotional brain, if we've explored that a little bit, a lot of times the cognitive brain can turn back on if we're calming those or norming, right? I call it norming. You're norming the interaction that they had or norming the response. A lot of times, even like with students, they'll say, oh, I've heard that from other students. So it allows for them to feel like, okay, I'm not the only one that potentially felt this. Okay, so these are some things. How are the rest of you feeling? Can you or someone summarize the case from a medical point of view? So we can talk about the content, but we're also not missing the affect, right? Because we're asking those feeling questions. Okay, and now that we're clear about what happened, let's talk more about the case. I think there were aspects that you managed effectively and others that you see more challenging. I would like to explore each of these with you, right? So these are kind of how we debrief. So we talk about like what happened, what of the case do you think you managed well and why? What aspects of the case would you want to change and why? Sometimes that why is a lot of the chatting. Not chatting, sorry, I'm looking at the chat box, is a lot of the emotional piece there. Okay. So just recognize that. And then a lot of these other pieces of, you know, state what you would like to talk about as you're debriefing the student. If you notice that the student is having like an emotional response within the exchange with the client or in the exchange, and even some of their reflections, tap into that with them, like explore that with them a little bit. Again, it's not our job to be their counselors, but it is our job to care what they feel and care how they think about what they feel. Does make such a huge difference, right? As we're working with our students. So how do we do this in nursing? We just keep doing it more and more and more and more. We make sure we provide opportunities for students to engage with us and with each other. And we allow for the practice, right? Practice really does allow us to be more comfortable with these conversations and tapping into that part of our brain that sometimes isn't very mature, right? So we want to help them to do that. And that's all I have time for today. I could talk for hours about this, but that's all I have time for. And this is my contact information. So feel free to email me if you have any questions or anything of the sort. Thank you so much. I know there's some questions in the queue, so I'm going to stop sharing. Oops, sorry. And I think Marianne is going to help me with the Q&A.
We do have a couple of questions, Jenny. One is, what level of student do you use that telehealth sim with?
That was an undergraduate telehealth sim.
Okay.
But you can easily use that in any level. So, I mean, you know, the student on an undergraduate level isn't going to be prescribing or anything like that. Their job can be to triage. And these were juniors, just year-wise. So they had one more year of clinical. This was their third clinical.
Okay. Alyssa tells that they're incorporating affective items in their courses, but they're struggling to determine how to measure them. Is it enough to give the student credit if they complete a reflective journal entry that includes the components that are mentioned in the journal prompt?
Absolutely. I mean, so I develop rubrics, and a lot in the rubrics as I'm evaluating a reflection or a journal, I look for the thoroughness, and that's kind of how I assess. So I'll score like 0, 1, 2, the thoroughness, or giving examples, things like that. And that's kind of how I'm able to evaluate that affective domain.
September mentions that if you ask a student how they feel, you have to be prepared to deal with that feeling. And that may be where many of us feel unprepared.
I agree. I agree. So if you want to stay very specific to what you're teaching, I would do this. Tell me more about how that interaction, or tell me more about when the client responded in that way. What was going on in your brain, and what were you feeling about it? So if you kind of stay very specific to what you're trying to talk about, a lot of times you'll get what you want from that particular interaction. Because if you ask like a general "how are you feeling" question, oh my gosh, it can be a very loaded question. But we want to tap into like, tell me how you feel about this assignment, right? Or tell me how you feel about your progression in clinical is going. Does that make sense?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anka. Another one. How to get students to understand what you're sharing, not talking down to them.
Okay, I got it. Yeah, okay. So I always start with positive feedback. Always, 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 always. I'll say that was a great question, right? Or that's that I'm so glad you're curious about. I use the word curious a lot when I debrief or when I interact with students. Like, I'm curious about what your thoughts and feelings are about that, in a very like exploratory, excitatory way. Like, wow, that's so fascinating. Tell me more, right? Um, and a lot of times that will open the door. It's all how you say something as opposed to what you say, and a little bit of combo of both, but it is your tone, right? And how and what that could look like for a student. Did that
Okay.
answer the question?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll watch the Q&A and see if that person feels that she got the answer she was looking for. I'm not sure. Yes, she says yes. Thank you.
Okay.
And Nancy says, is this something you recommend using as a clinical grade or experiential? I'm not sure exactly what she means by that, but
So affective domain can be implemented in didactic, clinical, simulation, online learning. It's just in all those examples I gave in the slide deck. Are we spending time reflecting with our students? Are we spending time debriefing with them on concepts or on topics? You can even pre-record a PowerPoint presentation or a Zoom recording talking about the exploration of belief systems and values, right? And that's tapping into the affective domain. So there's so many different. It's not just a one kind of method. It's an all inclusive. It's that, think of affective domain as like the tip of the topping of the sundae in holism and holistic nursing. Right. So we've got to, it's almost like we're gluing things together. We're gluing the cognitive and the psychomotor together with the affective domain because we're giving them that experience.
Okay, and Nancy clarifies that she was asking the question about the telehealth sim experience in regard to whether it's a clinical grade. So,
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, you can use it however you want. We've used this in courses too, where we, activate the classroom and it's just part of the course. This particular, this was a grade during their clinical final simulation. So they had to do this exchange. And the grade was, we were measuring the affect, actually. I should have showed you the rubric, but, and then they also had to come up with a care plan for this patient. So we used a software system that the students have to chart in. So they developed the patient and the assessment and a care plan and all that kind of stuff.
so there can be many components.
Many, yeah. I
Evaluate.
only showed you a snippet. So we went on for a little bit longer.
Okay. And question from Jean. How do you handle situations when a student is experiencing symptoms of an active mental health issue during clinical? She had a student who had a bipolar disorder, uncomfortable being on the psych unit, and a student who dissociated during an interaction with a patient.
Yeah, I've had the same thing happen to me. I have in the past pulled the student aside and sat with them and did like a quick little triage with them, and then got them connected with the counseling service, or if it was really acute, which didn't happen to me, but um, there's always the ED, which is unfortunate to. I mean, it's a resource. So if they're that dissociated, depending on what's going on. But yeah, safety first and making sure that they're getting home safely with another student or something of the sort, calling a family member if you need to. It really is. It's just like if the student was to pass out, it's not much different on the unit. So just making sure that we're tapping into the resources that we need. And that I called my support staff back at the university so that they knew and there was an incident report and all that kind of stuff. But just making sure to follow up with counseling care for them on campus. I've had many students who sometimes will come to my office and I'll say, listen, I'm your faculty. I care about you, but this is something you need to talk with a counselor about. And I give them phone numbers and names and things like that. So.
Teresa just shared that they used a simulated telehealth experience in their community health course in conjunction with theater students who were the standardized patients, the patients of a dying CF young adult contemplating moving from palliative to hospice.
Yeah, I did something similar, Teresa. Myself and a colleague of mine who's an actor, we developed a standardized patient program at my previous university, and we trained SPs who were actors, and we did a palliative care sim with, oh my gosh, it was so powerful, with students, undergraduate pediatric clinical students. That was the course they were in, and we had one student actor play a patient who had ALL, and then we had two student actors, adult actors actually, who played her parents. And it just was so powerful. So that was really, I mean, those scenarios are easier to measure that affective domain. You're looking at empathy, compassion. You're looking at, what that looks like when we're interacting. But after that interaction, one of the students actually went to clinical the following week. And she came into my office and she said, thank you so much for that experience, because just yesterday, my patient died and I wouldn't have been comfortable having a conversation with the parents about it if I didn't do that simulation first. She was like in tears in my office saying, thank you for making me comfortable, helping me to be more comfortable with that experience. And that's just something you can't, you know, you can't even, these soft skills are so important for them to practice over and over and over and over again. There's no check off, right? There's no like, okay, I use sterile technique, it's just different. So they have to practice it over and over again. And that's really my main push with this presentation is make sure you're A, providing opportunity, B, following through, and C, doing it as often as you can. And you'll find that it's super liberating as a faculty to be able to have these affective domain development sessions, I would call them, with students, because it's just so refreshing.
And that's when we get the faculty get the positive feedback, is when that student comes in the office and tells you a story like you just related, Anka.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're just at 1 o'clock, and I want to thank everyone for coming today, and thank Anka for her wonderful presentation. I hope you got wonderful ideas about how to incorporate affective learning into your existing curricula. And we will get back to you after the first of the year with more webinars and other opportunities to dialogue with you on important issues related to nursing education. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate all you do.